It was the late 1500s, a time when maps were filled with blank spaces and the word America still sounded exotic and uncertain. In England, Queen Elizabeth I ruled with a steady hand, her court filled with explorers, adventurers, and dreamers. Across the ocean, the Spanish had already begun to build empires. The English, eager to claim their own place in this new world, began sending expeditions westward, across dangerous seas, through storms, and into lands no European had ever seen. Among those dreamers was a man named Sir Walter Raleigh, a favorite of the Queen. He was charming, ambitious, and obsessed with the idea of founding an English colony in North America. To Raleigh, the New World was not just a patch of wilderness, it was the future of England itself. In 1584, Raleigh received the Queen's permission to establish a colony. He never sailed there himself, instead he sent explorers on his behalf. Their task was simple: find a suitable place for English settlement. When those explorers returned, they brought glowing reports of a region along the Atlantic coast, rich soil, friendly native peoples, and a mild climate. They called it Virginia in honor of the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. But within that vast area lay a small island, peaceful, green, and surrounded by calm waters. Its name was Roanoke. In 1585, Raleigh sent the first group of settlers to Roanoke Island, led by Sir Richard Grenville and Ralph Lane. They built a small fort and explored the land. At first, all seemed well. The local Native American tribes were curious and cautious, but trade and communication began. The English had never seen such abundance: corn, fish, wildlife, and untouched forests. Yet beneath that calm surface, tension began to grow. The English depended on the native people for food, but they didn't understand their ways, nor respect their customs. Small misunderstandings turned into anger. One of Lane's men was killed after a quarrel, and in revenge, Lane ordered an attack that destroyed an entire village. The harmony of Roanoke was broken. When Sir Francis Drake arrived months later, stopping by after a raid in the Caribbean, the colonists begged to go home. Drake agreed, and the first colony was abandoned. When a supply ship finally arrived from England, it found the settlement empty, the first failure of the English dream in America. But Sir Walter Raleigh was not a man to give up. In 1587, Raleigh planned another expedition, this time to create a true settlement, not just a military outpost. He chose John White, a skilled artist and mapmaker who had traveled on the first expedition, to lead the group. This time the colonists included not just men, but women and children, families who intended to build lives in the New World. There were 115 of them in total. They carried tools, seeds, livestock, and hopes for a peaceful, permanent home. Their destination was meant to be Chesapeake Bay, farther north, but due to storms, private quarrels, and the impatience of their ship's captain, they never reached it. Instead, they landed again on Roanoke Island, the same place where the first colony had failed. John White did not want to settle there, but the captain refused to take them farther. And so, reluctantly, the settlers began to rebuild their homes among the remains of the old fort. That summer, in August 1587, something remarkable happened. The first English child was born on American soil. Her name was Virginia Dare, granddaughter of John White. Her birth was celebrated as a symbol of hope, the first breath of English life in a new world. But hope was fragile. The settlers soon realized that food was short-running, relations with nearby tribes were strained, and storms were approaching. John White decided to return to England for supplies, promising to come back quickly. He left behind his daughter, his granddaughter, and more than 100 colonists, alone in a foreign land. White's journey back to England was swift, but returning to America would not be. When he arrived, England was in the grip of fear. The Spanish Armada, a massive fleet of warships, was preparing to invade the country. Every available English ship, large or small, was called into service to defend the country. White begged for a vessel to return to his people, but no one would risk it. Months turned into years. The seas were filled with war. The colonists at Roanoke were forgotten, trapped across an ocean. It was not until 1590, 3 long years later, that John White finally secured passage back to Roanoke. His heart must have been heavy with worry as his ship approached the familiar coastline, the land where his family waited. When the ship anchored near Roanoke, White looked eagerly toward the shore. No smoke rose from chimneys. No one waved from the beach. The island was quiet. Too quiet. He rowed to shore, his footsteps sinking into the sand. The houses were gone, dismantled carefully, not destroyed. The fort's wooden walls were still there, but empty. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, only silence. Then, carved into a post at the entrance, he saw a single word: Croatoan. White's heart leapt. This was the name of a nearby island, home to friendly natives who had once helped them. It was a sign. Perhaps the colonists had moved there. He found another carving on a tree, just the letters Crow, cut neatly into the bark. It seemed deliberate, as though left for him to find. White had agreed with the settlers that if they ever had to move, they would carve the name of their destination. If they were in danger, they would add a cross symbol. There was no cross. He believed they were alive, but before he could search Croatoan Island, a sudden storm swept in. His ship's crew, afraid of being wrecked, refused to stay. White begged, pleaded, even wept, but they sailed away, leaving Roanoke behind forever. He never saw his daughter, his granddaughter, or the colonists again. Years passed, then decades. No one ever found the colonists. When new settlers for Virginia arrived years later, they heard rumors, stories whispered by native tribes of pale-skinned people living among them. Some said they had seen English-style houses deeper inland, but no solid proof was ever found. To this day, the fate of the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries.
Centuries later, modern science took up the search. Archaeologists, historians, and even amateur treasure hunters combed the Carolina coast. Each discovery, pottery shards, iron tools, fragments of armor, was examined under microscopes and hope. On Hatteras Island, digs uncovered small English artifacts, a sword hilt, a copper ring, fragments of glass. Nearby were native tools, beads, and pottery. The mix suggested not invasion, but coexistence, English settlers living among the Croatan people.
Centuries later, modern science took up the search. Archaeologists, historians, and even amateur treasure hunters combed the Carolina coast. Each discovery, pottery shards, iron tools, fragments of armor, was examined under microscopes and hope. On Hatteras Island, digs uncovered small English artifacts, a sword hilt, a copper ring, fragments of glass. Nearby were native tools, beads, and pottery. The mix suggested not invasion, but coexistence, English settlers living among the Croatan people. farther inland, at a place called Site X near Albemarle Sound, explorers using ground-penetrating radar found traces of what may have been small English dwellings. Pieces of Elizabethan pottery, the same kind carried by Raleigh's colonists, lay buried in the soil. Perhaps some settlers moved inland seeking safety, carving out a humble life beyond the reach of storms and politics. Still, no single discovery tells the full story. The sand keeps its secrets. Over time, the lost colony became less of a fact and more of a feeling. It entered poems, paintings, and school books. To some, it symbolized tragedy, an early failure in England's dream of empire. To others, it represented adaptation, the quiet blending of cultures. In the 1800s, writers romanticized the story. They imagined Virginia Dare, the baby born on Roanoke, growing up among the natives, turning into a graceful figure of legend. In one version, she transformed into a white doe, eternally roaming the forests in silence, neither English nor native, belonging to both worlds. Such tales had no proof, but they offered comfort, a way to turn mystery into meaning. Historians debated endlessly. Some argued the settlers starved and died soon after White left. Others believed they were attacked by hostile tribes. A few suggested they tried to sail back to England in a makeshift boat and were lost at sea. Each theory found supporters and skeptics. The truth, most scholars admit, is that multiple fates may have occurred. Some perished, some were absorbed into native communities, and some may have wandered inland until the wilderness swallowed their names. But in the calm light of night, when we think of them, it is easy to imagine a simpler ending. Families sitting beside native neighbors, sharing food, learning words, raising children who would never know where England was. If you visit Roanoke Island now, you will find it peaceful again. Tall pines whisper in the coastal wind. A small park marks the spot where the fort once stood, and tourists walk along quiet trails. At dusk, the air grows soft with salt and memory. Every summer, an outdoor play called The Lost Colony is performed beneath the stars, telling the story of those vanished settlers. Children watch wide-eyed, fireflies blinking like old spirits. When the final scene ends and the stage darkens, the audience hears waves lapping against the shore, the same sound those colonists once heard every night. Some mysteries resist closure, not because the answers are hidden, but because the questions have become part of who we are. Roanoke is one of those mysteries. Its silence shaped the story of early America as much as its triumphs did. In every generation, someone new picks up the trail. A historian with a theory, a diver scanning the seabed, a child tracing the word Croatan with a fingertip in a textbook. The search continues, softly like the tide itself, coming and going, uncovering and covering, forever. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Roanoke is not about disappearance, but about endurance. Even when records vanish, even when names fade, the human need to wonder survives. The colonists may be gone, but their story remains, told in classrooms, whispered by campfires, and now gently spoken into microphones to lull modern listeners to sleep. Close your eyes and imagine that island once more. The wind through pine needles, the scent of salt and soil, a small fire glowing beside a wooden hut. Somewhere in the distance, a baby's cry softens into the sea breeze. Time moves on, but in that soundless moment, the past and present rest together. The 19th century was an age of rediscovery. Steamships crossed the Atlantic faster, and scholars searched the New World not only for land, but for meaning. Among maps and letters in England's archives, dusty pages told of the lost colony. reports by Raleigh, accounts by John White, and notes by sailors who never returned. Historians of the Victorian era, inspired by empire and progress, reopen the question. They viewed Roanoke not as a failure, but as a beginning, the seed from which all English America grew. Without Roanoke, there might have been no Jamestown, no Virginia, no story of a United States at all. And so Roanoke transformed from tragedy to legend, a soft, enduring whisper of where everything began. As centuries passed, artists began to fill the gaps that facts had left. Painters imagined the settlers stepping off small boats, carrying children and hopes into the misty forest. Writers, especially in early America, wove Virginia Dare into myth, the first English child, the eternal symbol of innocence lost to wilderness. Some poems told of her wandering through the woods in white garments, a spirit of purity untouched by time. Others claim that she became a white deer, appearing to hunters only at dawn, as if to remind them of a forgotten past. These were not histories, but lullabies, songs that made a quiet story live again in the American imagination. By the time the 20th century arrived, Roanoke had become a bridge between fact and folklore, between the old world and the new.